Welcome back to our channel in the quiet churn of 1939. While the world braced against the winds of war, the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia was steadfast in its duty, producing Lincoln wheat pennies by the millions. Machines clanked, presses roared, and copper planchets moved along conveyors like clockwork. Amid the blur of efficiency, unnoticed by the human eye and undetectable to the casual observer, a few humble cents bore a subtle but fateful flaw. It wasn't revolutionary at first glance. Just another coin meant to jingle in the pockets of everyday Americans. No one would have thought this tiny anomaly, buried under the cover of mass production, would one day throw collectors into a frenzy. That year, the Philadelphia Mint struck over 300 million 1-cent coins. Most left the building in pristine, standard form, a solemn profile of Lincoln on the obverse, flanked by the mottos, "In God We Trust," and "Liberty." The reverse, adorned with two wheat stalks curving around the words, 1 cent, and "United States of America," was a familiar sight. And yet, amid the precision and repetition, a handful of coins betrayed a tiny imperfection, a misstep born not of neglect, but of the quirks of production under pressure. Decades passed. Coins changed, times changed, and memories of the 1939 wheat penny blurred into the numismatic background. But in a weathered antique shop in northern Illinois, a collector named Harold Carver examined a lot of low-grade wheat pennies from a dusty glass jar. He wasn't looking for treasure, just enjoying the rhythmic joy of sorting copper relics, the scent of oxidized metal wafting up from his hands. A flicker of detail caught his eye. He leaned closer. Something about the D mint mark looked off, except 1939 Philadelphia coins didn't carry a mint mark. Denver coins did. But this one? This was something else. He fetched his loupe. The mint mark wasn't just off-center, it was doubled. Subtly, sharply. The curve of the D shimmered just beside itself, almost as though the die had trembled when it kissed the copper. His pulse quickened. A double die? In 1939, Harold scoured reference guides and forums, comparing photos, magnifications, and discussions. As it turned out, a few specimens of the 1939 D Lincoln wheat penny had been struck with a double die obverse. Not in a glaring way, but in a ghostly, almost elusive shimmer of the lettering. The doubling appeared most noticeably on Liberty, and sometimes across the date. This was no ordinary strike error, it was a double die error, a consequence of the hub imprecisely striking the die during preparation. And this was one of the rarest forms from that year. At first, Harold didn't dare believe its potential. He showed it to friends, collectors, and dealers. Many waved it off. Others squinted and shrugged. But one elderly numismatist at a local coin show grew visibly still when he examined the coin under a microscope. "You've got something very strange here," he whispered. "Very strange indeed." Over the next few months, whispers of a double-die 1939 wheat penny began to gain traction in small collector circles. Word crept through online forums and quietly into the ears of dedicated error collectors. It wasn't in the standard catalog listings. There were no confirmed auction sales. But images began to surface, photos of similarly affected coins with subtle die doubling on the obverse, some clearer than others, each sparking debates. Was this an overlooked anomaly? An unlisted variety? Or something that had simply flown under the radar for decades? As more examples surfaced, still only a few prices began to flicker upward. First, a collector in Ohio sold his double die example to a local shop for $120, thinking he'd scored well. Then a sharper, better preserved one went for $600 on an online auction. Before long, the numismatic community took notice. Coin World ran a brief feature. Error-ref.com updated their listings. Suddenly, the 1939 D double die Lincoln set was no longer a rumor. It was a recognized rarity. The value began to evolve in unpredictable ways. A circulated piece with modest doubling fetched $800 in early 2010. Then, in a dramatic eBay auction, a near mint-state example went for over $2,500. Collectors started poring over their 1939 D cents. Dealers pulled coins out of forgotten stock books, squinting, hoping for a ghostly shimmer on the Liberty. Most found nothing. But a few, just a precious few, found themselves holding a coin that had become something far greater than its original value. Yet the story didn't stop there. In 2017, a renowned grading company certified a specimen with such strong, clean doubling that it challenged previous assumptions about how severe the error could get. It was graded MS65 red, and speculation buzzed about whether more deeply struck examples might exist. The coin fetched over $7,000 at auction, shattering expectations. But still, something about the error remained elusive. Why had so few been found? And why were some doubled in Liberty, while others displayed it more clearly in the date? That's when the unexpected twist emerged. In a detailed die study published by a prominent numismatic researcher in 2019, a theory surfaced that shook even seasoned collectors. The 1939 D double die error may have originated not just from a doubled hubbing, but from the reuse of an experimental die that had never been officially cataloged. According to the study, the U.S. Mint had experimented with new hubbing techniques during the late 1930s. Some dies, prepared under these conditions, were rejected and marked for destruction. But due to wartime material constraints and staff turnover, a few experimental dies may have slipped back into production unnoticed. The implications were enormous. It meant that the 1939 D double die wasn't just an error, it was a ghost from an experimental phase, a coin born from a miscommunication buried within the bureaucratic churn of the mint. Suddenly, this wasn't just a misprint. It was a piece of forgotten history. Auction houses took notice. In 2021, a coin from a private Colorado collection held since the 1970s and unknown to the market surfaced. The doubling was pronounced, but what made it extraordinary was the presence of microscopic die polish lines found only on prototype strikes. It sold privately for $18,750. Rumors swirled that the buyer was a West Coast tech entrepreneur building a museum-quality collection focused on mint history and transitional errors. For Harold Carver, the man who first noticed the strange doubling in a dusty coin shop, the journey was personal. He never sold his find. He watched prices climb, collectors speculate, and auctioneers announce records, but he kept his coin in a locked safe, sealed in a protective slab with his name etched into the label. It wasn't just a coin. It was the spark of a revelation. Proof that even in the most unassuming places, an antique shop, a pile of wheat cents, history waits quietly to be rediscovered. The true scope of the 1939 D double die penny remains uncertain. Fewer than a few dozen verified examples have surfaced. Some believe others are still out there, rattling unnoticed in old coffee cans or forgotten drawers. Experts estimate that fewer than 100 may have been struck, and of those, perhaps only a handful survive in pristine condition. And just when it seemed the story had run its course, another ripple appeared. In early 2024, a collector in New Hampshire posted high-resolution photos of a 1939 D penny with an additional anomaly. Not only was the Liberty doubled, but the lower loop of the 9 in 1939 appeared stretched, as if pulled by gravity. Experts rushed in. Theories abounded, a die chip or perhaps a clash. But after careful analysis, it was proposed that this variant might represent a third state of the same double die, further worn and affected by repeated polishing. Now, a new race has begun. Collectors are no longer just searching for the original doubling. They're looking for transitional states, proof that this die went through multiple production cycles, each leaving its fingerprint on a small handful of coins. If confirmed, these variants could mark not only rare coins, but key moments in the timeline of a minting mystery. Today, the 1939 D double die Lincoln wheat penny stands not just as a curiosity or a collector's prize, it's a symbol a copper echo of an era shaped by war, technology, and transformation. It's a reminder that even the smallest imperfections can carry the weight of history, and that sometimes the rarest treasures begin as humble mistakes, waiting in silence to be seen. In the early spring of 1942, the United States was bracing for the full impact of a world at war. Factories once humming with domestic production were now retooled for tanks, aircraft, and munitions. Every ounce of copper was suddenly precious, every decision shaped by conflict. Yet, in the midst of this wartime transformation, the humble 1-cent wheat penny continued its march through the presses at the U.S. Mint, bearing the familiar image of Abraham Lincoln and twin wheat stalks on the reverse. A coin so ordinary, it passed daily through thousands of hands unnoticed. But history, as it often does, had something extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. Most 1942 Lincoln cents were struck in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Mint officials had no reason to expect anything unusual. Copper was still the primary material for pennies that year. Steel planchets wouldn't appear until 1943. The dies were standard, the engravings unchanged. And yet, amidst the countless coins produced, something slipped through. A single, quiet aberration that no one noticed at first. Not the mint workers. Not the bankers. Not even the earliest collectors. But it was there, years later, in a cluttered corner of an antique shop nestled on the edge of rural Wisconsin. A retired schoolteacher named Eleanor Mullins ran her fingers across a dusty box of mixed pennies. She wasn't a collector by trade, just someone who liked history told in small, tangible pieces. As she examined the dull brown coins, she spotted a 1942 penny with a slightly off-center rim and a strange glint beneath the tarnish. She didn't recognize the significance at first. It just looked different. The color was subtly wrong. The feel in her hand, off. She set it aside, unaware that her fingertips were holding a mistake nearly forgotten by time. Eleanor mailed the coin to her nephew, Thomas, an amateur numismatist with a habit of spending his evenings beneath a magnifying lamp, studying coins with the focus of a watchmaker. When he unwrapped the modest piece, he didn't expect much. But then, as the lens brought Lincoln's profile into sharp relief, his brow furrowed. There was something unusual in the strike. A doubled, "In God we trust." A slight doubling on "Liberty," too. The rim thicker than it should be on one edge. The letters on the reverse seemed partially flattened, and the wheat stalks one was missing detail, as though the die had slipped mid-dash strike. It wasn't just a die error. It wasn't just poor centering. There was chatter near Lincoln's shoulder, an odd texture, like a ghost of a previous design. The metal beneath the patina didn't match the copper he knew. It was lighter, with a silvery hue in places where the surface wore down. He reached for his scale and held his breath. The coin weighed just slightly under 3.11 grams, just a hair less than it should. Enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to stir his pulse. He placed it under XRF analysis at a local lab a week later. The results stunned him. This 1942 penny had traces of zinc and steel beneath the copper, an anomaly that shouldn't exist in any 1942 cent. Suddenly, Eleanor's casual antique shop find was transformed into something extraordinary. Theories poured in. Had the mint accidentally struck a few 1942 cents on prototype steel planchets in preparation for the 1943 wartime change? Or had leftover steel blanks from an experimental batch been mistakenly used? No official record acknowledged such a test, yet this penny suggested otherwise. Other collectors began whispering about it. A second similar penny appeared at a coin show in Ohio, and then a third, though each bore slight differences. None were as well preserved or as clearly struck as Eleanor's coin. The numismatic community buzzed with speculation. This wasn't just a misalignment or a double die. This was something deeper, something systemic, an accidental peek behind the curtain of the mint's wartime experimentation. Word spread quickly through forums and private circles. By 1980, the coin had changed hands 3 times, each time climbing in value. At one point, It was traded not for cash, but for a pristine 1909 SVB penny and an entire binder of pre-war half-dollars. The whispers grew louder in the early 2000s as better imaging and analysis tools allowed collectors to test and confirm the metallurgical oddities. Auction houses became intrigued. Yet the coin remained elusive, passed quietly from collector to collector, never staying in public view long enough to attract major media attention. Its rarity, after all, was amplified by its secrecy. Every collector who owned it knew. Part of the coin's mystique was in how little the world still knew about it. The coin's oddities were many. The most dramatic was its planchet composition, zinc traces never meant for 1942. But then there was the strike itself, evidence of a die clash on the reverse, where Lincoln's bust had faintly imprinted against the wheat stalks. A clash that would only occur under pressure so intense and misaligned it would typically destroy a die. But here it was preserved. The coin's edge was also uncharacteristic. Instead of the soft roll typical of a wheat penny, this one had a more defined collar, sharp, almost proof-like in detail, suggesting a press cycle outside of regular circulation strikes. Then came the twist. In 2017, a researcher from the American Numismatic Association's Archival Committee stumbled upon an internal mint memo from December 1942. The memo referenced a batch of experimental strikes using salvaged zinc-coated steel blanks that had mistakenly arrived at the Philadelphia Mint months too early. Only 2 test strikes were approved. The rest were said to be scrapped. But the memo ended with a single line, cryptic and curious. 2 pieces retained. Remainder melted, no record kept post-inspection. That single line confirmed what collectors had long suspected. The 1942 steel penny wasn't a myth. It wasn't even an accident entirely. It was a test, an unacknowledged precursor to the 1943 steel since somehow at least one of those test pieces had entered circulation. Eleanor's find may have been the only surviving example that not only circulated but survived, weathered, passed through hands, only to resurface when no one expected it. By 2023, the coin emerged publicly for the first time in decades at a private auction hosted by a prominent New York firm. The bidding began modestly, drawing in only those who recognized its true nature. But as the minutes passed, whispers turned to paddles, and paddles turned to phones. The final price stunned even seasoned collectors. This forgotten mistake, born in the fog of war and passed over by generations as a mere penny, sold for an astonishing $144,000. In the quiet hum of a Philadelphia mint in 1951, copper blanks tumbled down steel chutes, clinking together like faint echoes of a nation rebounding from war. Workers moved swiftly beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights, their fingers gloved, their ears accustomed to the mechanical rhythm of dies striking blanks into Lincoln wheat pennies. Each coin, no more than a simple cent, bore the familiar image of President Abraham Lincoln, a fixture since 1909. And on the reverse, 2 wheat stalks curved up from the base like open hands cradling the words, 1 cent, and United States of America. But hidden among these countless impressions was something that should never have existed. Something that would not reveal itself for decades. In 1951, 3 mints operated: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Coins struck in Philadelphia bore no mint mark. It was in this unassuming stream of cent pieces, lacking any geographic clue, that the anomaly occurred. Not flashy, not dramatic, at least not at first glance. The errors of this era were often subtle, unnoticed by even the most scrutinizing eyes. They were not born of negligence, but of the sheer magnitude of production. Over 1 billion Lincoln wheat cents were minted that year. 1 billion opportunities for something to go wrong. And no one noticed at the time. The flawed coin quietly slipped into circulation, indistinguishable from its billions of siblings. It clinked into pockets, passed from hand to hand, vanished into drawers, lost among pennies that bought candy, postage, and dreams. Its imperfection, slight as it was, meant nothing to the people who spent it. Not yet. Years passed. And somewhere in a dusty Arizona garage, decades later, an elderly man leaned over a box of coins he hadn't touched since his youth. He was not a collector, at least not in the traditional sense. But he had always had a soft spot for weak pennies. Maybe it was the nostalgia, or the comforting simplicity of them. He would set them aside in jars, long forgotten. It was on a sweltering June afternoon that he poured one such jar onto a faded velvet cloth and began to sift. Just for fun, he thought. He didn't see it at first. The coin sat beneath the others, muted, coppery, unremarkable. But when it rolled slightly in the light, something felt off. The date, 1951, was crisp. Lincoln's profile, as always, stern and iconic. Yet something about the reverse didn't sit right. The man squinted. He fetched a magnifier, brushing dust from the lens with the back of his shirt. The coin stared back at him. The wheat stalks were uneven. Not in the way where might affect them, but in their very strike. One side appeared thicker, with a doubled edge not seen in any guidebook. The lettering, too particularly in E pluribus unum, showed a faint doubling, like a ghostly echo. He flipped it again. The edge was sharp, but the surfaces were oddly misaligned. His heart thumped. He had seen double dies before, sure, but never one like this. Not in a 1951 wheat penny. He paused, pulled out another 1951 for comparison, then another. The difference wasn't imagination. It was real. He packed the coin carefully, sent it to a third-party grader. Weeks crawled by. When the email finally arrived, he stared at it with disbelief. 1951 Lincoln said double die reverse. Verified. Extremely rare. The message was short, but its implications echoed louder than any fanfare. This coin, once worth a single cent, was now something else entirely. Its error placed it in a whisper-thin class of rare anomalies. And suddenly, the man who had once used pennies to wave down tablecloth corners on windy picnic days found himself holding history. The market reacted quietly at first. Whispers among numismatists. A few speculative collectors paid modest sums, $50, $75, maybe $100 for early confirmed examples. Most remained skeptical. After all, doubling errors from the 50s were not unheard of, and the coin's features were subtle. But then came the twist. A private auction house listed a specimen in near-mint condition. The photographs were striking. The doubled lettering was unmistakable, more prominent than any previously confirmed 1951 reverse. 1 cent appeared shadowed, as if traced twice by the die. This wasn't a post-mint damage trick. This was a genuine double die, and a bold one at that. The bidding started low, conservative. But then the bids jumped. 500, 800, 1200. It leapt in fits and starts. A phone bidder from Michigan. A museum representative from Maryland. It ended north of $3,200, an absurd figure for a penny, even among enthusiasts. The coin world took notice. Over time, more examples surfaced, though only a handful. Each had slightly varying degrees of the same reverse doubling. All traced back to Philadelphia. The theory emerged. A single worn die hub was used during the early stages of reverse die creation, briefly, before being replaced. Coins struck during this brief window bore the doubled reverse. A mere blink in minting history. A ghostly misalignment of mechanics. Collectors began revisiting their hoards. Boxes long dismissed as common were suddenly potential treasure troves. Young numismatists took to magnifiers with renewed purpose. A high schooler in Iowa found one in a penny roll bought from a local bank for 50 cents. His story went viral after he sold it for $2,800, enough to pay for his first year of college. The coin, humble in design, had become a symbol of the thrill of the hunt. A reminder that even the smallest object could hide the grandest of secrets. Yet, the market was restless. Prices fluctuated. 1 month, an XF45 specimen sold for $950. The next, a lightly circulated AU example, soared to $1,700. Then came the discovery that changed everything: a specimen in full red uncirculated condition. It was a museum-quality piece, stored in a coin album since 1951, untouched by fingers or oxidation. Its color glowed with that fresh mint luster collectors rarely see. The doubling on the reverse was clean, precise. It crossed the auction block in late autumn, quietly, without hype. But the coin didn't stay quiet. The final bid eclipsed $12,000. That sale sent ripples through the community. The penny was no longer a curiosity, it was a serious investment. Articles followed. Panels at coin shows began to include it in discussions of mid-century minting anomalies. What once had been a ghost among billions was now commanding five-figure attention. Yet despite the excitement, estimates suggested fewer than 24 high-quality examples had surfaced. The majority showed heavy wear, as expected for a coin that circulated undetected for half a century. The uncirculated specimen was a miracle. It was around this time that a researcher from Ohio took interest in the die sequences. Through careful tracking of die markers, minute scratches, chip points, ridge distortions, he hypothesized that the 1951 double die reverse may have been produced from not one, but two flawed reverse dies. That would explain the variance in doubling severity. His paper sparked debate. If true, it might mean even rarer subtypes within the error itself. Some collectors began sorting their finds even more meticulously. A new race had begun, not just to find the coin, but to categorize its nuances. And then came the unexpected twist. A collector in Oregon, sifting through a lot of poorly sorted world coins purchased online, found something odd. A 1951 U.S. wheat penny, obviously American, but with a twist. The planchet was lighter, the edge unusually sharp. He weighed it, 2.7 grams instead of the standard 3.11. Alarmed, he submitted it to grading. The result: a 1951 wheat cent struck on a foreign planchet. Most likely, a leftover blank intended for a Mexican 5-centavo coin. How it entered the U.S. mint process remained a mystery. Stranger still, it bore the same double die reverse. A double error. Two anomalies in one coin. A unicorn. Experts were stunned. This coin was not only struck in error with a double die, it was struck on the wrong metal altogether. It changed the narrative. Was the 1951 double die the result of rush production during a planchet mix-up? Could foreign blanks have jammed machinery, contributing to alignment issues? Theories bloomed. The hybrid coin sold quietly, privately, but not before photographs and provenance were shared. Its last known price: just over $21,000. Not because of gold or silver or rarity in mintage, but because a single cent defied every expectation of what it could be. It was imperfect, yes, but it was unique. And in the world of collectors, that kind of anomaly is more valuable than perfection. Today, the 1951 double die reverse wheat penny continues to command attention. It doesn't glitter like a Morgan dollar. It doesn't gleam with precious metal. But it holds a magnetism that few modern coins can replicate. A reminder that amid a billion ordinary objects, a handful carry within them the echoes of errors, the whispers of accidents that became legends. And still, somewhere perhaps in a forgotten drawer, an attic box, or inside an old mason jar in a suburban kitchen, others may lie waiting, disguised as the most common of coins, just 1 cent away from rediscovery.